Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Damon Schaefer stood in the marble-floored foyer of his sprawling mansion, adjusting his Italian silk tie as he prepared for another day of commanding his construction empire. At 42, he had built Schaefer Industries from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company that dominated the Northeast commercial construction market. His steel-gray eyes reflected the same cold efficiency that had crushed countless competitors and earned him both respect and fear in equal measure. "Daddy!" 9-year-old Lily Schaefer bounded down the curved staircase, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. She was the one pure light in Damon's world. His daughter, conceived during what he believed were happier times with his wife Terry. "Princess," Damon's voice softened as he caught her in his arms. "Ready for your appointment with Mrs. Montoya?" Terry Schaefer emerged from the kitchen, her auburn hair perfectly styled and her designer dress clinging to her still attractive figure. At 38, she maintained the same beauty that had initially captivated Damon 15 years ago when she was a struggling art student and he was a young contractor hungry for success. "I'll take her to the salon," Terry said, not meeting Damon's eyes. "I have some errands to run afterward." Damon nodded curtly. Their marriage had grown cold over the past 2 years, though he attributed it to the stress of his expanding business. What he didn't know was that Terry had been carrying on an affair with Reynaldo Bean, Damon's former business partner who had tried to steal clients and start a competing firm 3 years prior. The salon, Aurelia's Touch, was owned by Aurelia Montoya, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had been cutting hair for the wealthy families of their suburban Connecticut town for over 2 decades. She had watched marriages crumble and secrets spill across her salon chair, but she had never witnessed anything quite like what she was about to discover. As Lily settled into the styling chair, chattering about her upcoming school play, Aurelia began her usual routine of washing and sectioning the child's hair. But as she lifted a section near the back of Lily's head, her fingers detected something unusual, a small, raised scar hidden beneath the blonde strands. "Lily, sweetheart, have you had any accidents lately? Any falls?" Aurelia asked carefully. "No, Mrs. Montoya." "What?" Aurelia's experienced, I recognized the precise, surgical nature of the scar. This wasn't from a childhood tumble or accident. This was from a medical procedure, one that had been deliberately concealed. "Wait a second." Aurelia's voice trailed off as she parted the hair more carefully. "Dad, this is—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face draining of color. The scar was small but unmistakable, the telltale mark of a subcutaneous tracking device implantation. Aurelia had seen similar scars before, but never on child. Her brother worked in private security, and she knew enough about surveillance technology to recognize the signs. "Dad, don't look," Lily whispered, sensing the tension in the room. But Damon had already moved closer, his trained eye immediately assessing the situation. Years of dealing with industrial espionage and corporate sabotage had taught him to recognize surveillance equipment. What he saw made his blood run cold. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "This is Damon Schaefer. I need police and paramedics at Aurelia's Touch salon immediately. My daughter appears to have been implanted with a tracking device without my knowledge." As they waited for the authorities, Damon's mind raced. Only 3 people had regular access to Lily: himself, Terry, and their live-in nanny, Viola Wood. The procedure would have required medical knowledge and equipment. But more importantly, it would have required someone with a motive to track his daughter's movements. The first seeds of suspicion about his wife's true nature were beginning to sprout in Damon's calculating mind. Chapter 2. Unraveling Deceptions. Detective Gavin Cherry arrived at the salon within 20 minutes, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. A veteran of the force with 15 years of experience in cybercrimes and family cases, he had seen his share of custody battles gone wrong. But this case immediately struck him as something more sinister. "Mr. Schaefer, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Detective Cherry said as paramedics carefully examined the device under Lily's skin. Are you and your wife going through any marital difficulties? Any custody disputes? Damon's jaw tightened. My wife and I have our differences, but nothing that would warrant this. He gestured toward his daughter, who was being comforted by Aurelia while medical professionals worked. The paramedic, a young woman named Carrie Ray, looked up from her examination. Sir, this device appears to be a GPS tracker, but it's medical grade. Whoever implanted this had surgical training and access to specialized equipment. The procedure would have required sedation for a child this young. When would this have been done? Damon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Based on a healing pattern, I'd estimate 2 to 3 weeks ago, Carrie replied. Damon's mind immediately went to the weekend 3 weeks prior, when Terry had taken Lily on what she claimed was a girls' trip to visit her sister in Boston. They had returned a day later than planned, with Terry explaining that Lily had come down with a stomach bug and needed to rest before traveling. Detective Cherry pulled Damon aside. Mr. Schaefer, I need to be direct with you. In cases like this, we usually find that one parent is planning to disappear with the child. The tracking device suggests someone wanted to monitor your daughter's location continuously. You think my wife is planning to kidnap my daughter? I think someone is planning something, and they wanted to make sure they could find her no matter where she went, Cherry replied. I need you to think carefully about any changes in your wife's behavior recently. Any new friendships, unexplained absences, financial irregularities. As Damon considered the detective's words, his phone buzzed with a text from Terry, running late with errands. We'll be home by dinner. Kiss Lily for me. For the first time in months, Damon paid attention to the timestamp and location data on his wife's messages. She had been sending these vague errand texts frequently, always with convenient excuses for extended absences. Detective, I need to show you something, Damon said, pulling up his phone's message history. My wife has been exhibiting a pattern of unexplained absences. I dismissed it as shopping trips or social activities, but now, Cherry studied the messages. Mr. Schaefer, I'm going to need you to be very careful about how you proceed. If your wife is planning to disappear with your daughter, confronting her directly could accelerate her timeline. We need to investigate this properly. What do you need from me? First, we need to have this device safely removed from your daughter. Then, I need you to act normal at home while we conduct surveillance. Don't let your wife know what we've discovered. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and police interviews. The tracking device was successfully removed, revealing a sophisticated GPS unit with cellular connectivity. The serial number traced back to a medical supply company in Boston, the same city where Terry had claimed to take Lily 3 weeks ago. As evening approached, Damon returned home with Lily, his daughter having been sworn to secrecy about the day's events. The 9-year-old, frightened by the adult conversation she had overheard, readily agreed to keep quiet. Terry greeted them at the door, her smile bright, but her eyes unable to meet Damon's directly. How was the salon, sweetheart? She asked Lily. Fine, Mommy. Mrs. Montoya gave me a new haircut. It looks beautiful, Terry said, her fingers briefly touching the area where the device had been hidden. If she noticed anything different, she didn't show it. That night, as Terry slept beside him, Damon lay awake staring at the ceiling. The woman he had married, the mother of his child, had violated their daughter in the most fundamental way. The tracking device wasn't just about monitoring location. It was about power, control, and preparation for theft. For the first time in his marriage, Damon Schaefer began planning not a business strategy, but a war. Chapter 3. The Surveillance Web. The next morning brought a facade of normalcy that felt like poison in Damon's veins. He sat at the breakfast table, watching Terry butter toast for Lily while internally cataloging every micro-expression, every hesitation, every tell that he had been blind to for months. Detective Cherry had been clear, maintain the status quo while they built their case. But Damon Schaefer had not built an empire by waiting for others to act. He had his own resources, his own methods, and his own sense of justice. After dropping Lily at school, Damon made a call to Floyd Livingston, his head of security at Schaefer Industries. Floyd was a former military intelligence operative who had helped Damon navigate corporate espionage attempts and union troubles over the years. Floyd, I need you to set up comprehensive surveillance on my wife, Damon said without preamble. I want to know where she goes, who she sees, and what she does every minute of every day. Boss, that's a hell of a request. You sure about this? Someone implanted a tracking device in my daughter's head, Floyd. I'm sure about everything right now. Within hours, Floyd had assembled a team of 3 investigators and equipped them with the latest surveillance technology. They would maintain a discreet distance, documenting Terry's movements without alerting her to their presence. Meanwhile, Damon reached out to another old contact, Othis Sampson, a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets and financial fraud. If Terry was planning to disappear with Lily, she would need money, and that money would leave a trail. Otha, I need you to analyze every financial transaction my wife has made in the past 6 months, Damon instructed. Look for cash withdrawals, new accounts, unusual purchases, anything that suggests preparation for flight. How deep do you want me to go, Damon? All the way to the bottom. I want to know if she's been stockpiling resources. By noon, the first surveillance reports were coming in. Terry had driven to a coffee shop in the next town over, where she met with a man Floyd's team identified as Reynaldo Bean. The meeting lasted 45 minutes, during which both appeared agitated and argumentative. Reynaldo Bean. The name hit Damon like a physical blow. His former business partner, the man who had tried to steal clients and destroy Schaefer Industries 3 years ago. The man Damon had crushed so thoroughly that Bean had been forced to declare bankruptcy and leave the construction business entirely. Son of a bitch, Damon muttered, staring at the surveillance photos on his phone. Reynaldo looked older, worn down by financial stress, but his eyes held the same cunning that had made him a dangerous adversary years ago. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Terry and Reynaldo weren't just having an affair. They were conspirators. The tracking device in Lily's head was part of a larger plan, one that would allow them to monitor and control his daughter's location even after they disappeared. Otha's preliminary financial analysis arrived that afternoon, revealing a pattern of suspicious activities. Over the past 4 months, Terry had been making regular cash withdrawals of $500 to $1,000, always from different ATMs and always on days when she claimed to be running errands. The total amount approached $15,000, enough to fund a disappearance, but not enough to trigger automatic reporting requirements. More damning still, Otha had discovered that Terry had opened a new bank account in Boston under her maiden name, Terry Brock. The account had been funded with a $25,000 deposit 3 weeks ago, the same weekend she had taken Lily to visit her sister. They're planning to run, Damon told Floyd over the phone. The question is when. Based on what we're seeing, boss, I'd say soon. Bean looked desperate in those photos, and your wife is showing all the signs of someone preparing for a major life change. That evening, Damon watched his wife serve dinner with new eyes. Every smile felt calculated, every gentle touch with Lily felt like a manipulation. Terry was preparing to steal his daughter, and she was doing it with the help of his greatest enemy. But Damon Schaefer had not survived the cutthroat world of construction by being passive. He had built his empire by anticipating his enemies' moves and crushing them before they could strike. As Terry kissed Lily goodnight, Damon made a decision that would change everything. He would not wait for the police to build their case. He would not trust the courts to protect his daughter. He would take matters into his own hands. And when he was finished, neither Terry nor Reynaldo would ever threaten his family again. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Trap Takes Shape. 3 days of surveillance had revealed the full scope of Terry and Reynaldo's plan. They met daily at different locations, a park, a library, a shopping mall, always maintaining the appearance of casual encounters while exchanging what appeared to be detailed information. Floyd's team had managed to plant listening devices in both Terry's car and Reynaldo's apartment, providing Damon with a chilling window into their conspiracy. The passport documents will be ready Friday. Reynaldo's voice crackled through the recording Floyd played for Damon. I've got contacts in Montreal who can help us disappear completely. What about the money? Terry's voice, usually soft and melodious, carried a hard edge Damon had never heard before. The insurance policy will pay out once they find a body. $2 million, tax-free. Enough to set us up for life. Damon's blood turned to ice. Insurance policy. Body. They weren't just planning to kidnap Lily. They were planning to kill him. Floyd, I need you to give me everything on their insurance plans, Damon said, his voice deadly calm. And I need you to find out who's helping them with the passport fraud. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that went deeper than Damon had imagined. Reynaldo had made contact with a document forger named Christopher Ponce, a man with connections to organized crime families in Boston. Ponce specialized in creating new identities for people who needed to disappear permanently. More shocking still, Otha's financial analysis revealed that Terry had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Damon 6 months ago, forging his signature on the documents. The policy included a double indemnity clause for accidental death, meaning she would receive $4 million if Damon died in what appeared to be an accident. They're going to kill me, take my daughter, and disappear with $4 million, Damon summarized to Floyd. And they're going to do it soon. Boss, we need to call the police. This is way beyond corporate espionage. No, Damon said firmly. The police move too slowly, and the courts are too forgiving. By the time they build a case, Terry and Reynaldo will have executed their plan. My daughter will be gone, and I'll be dead. So what do you want to do? I want to give them exactly what they're expecting, an accident. But they're going to be the ones who don't survive it. Damon's plan began to take shape over the next 24 hours. He would use his enemy's own strategy against them, turning their trap into his revenge. But first, he needed to ensure Lily's safety. That evening, Damon called his sister Blanca Schaefer-Knox, who lived in California with her husband and 2 children. Blanca was a successful pediatrician who had always adored Lily and would protect her without question. Blanca, I need you to do something for me without asking questions, Damon said during their phone call. I need you to come to Connecticut and take Lily back to California with you for an extended visit. Damon, what's wrong? You sound different. I can't explain right now, but Lily is in danger. I need her as far away from here as possible. Blanca, hearing the genuine fear in her brother's voice, agreed immediately. She would arrive Friday morning and take Lily back to California that afternoon under the guise of a surprise vacation. With his daughter's safety secured, Damon turned his attention to the final phase of his plan. He would give Terry and Reynaldo their opportunity to kill him, but he would be ready for them. And when the dust settled, they would be the ones who disappeared permanently. On Thursday evening, Damon made his move. He called Reynaldo directly, something he hadn't done in 3 years. Bean, this is Damon Schaefer. I have a proposition for you. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. What kind of proposition? The kind that could make us both a lot of money. Meet me at the old construction site on Route 7 tomorrow night at midnight. Come alone, and we'll discuss it. After hanging up, Damon called Floyd. It's time to end this. Chapter 5. The Point of No Return. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in New England. Damon watched from his office window as Blanca's rental car pulled into his driveway, his sister's familiar figure emerging to collect Lily for their surprise vacation. The goodbye was more difficult than Damon had anticipated. Lily, excited about her unexpected trip to California, hugged him tightly at the door. I'll miss you, Daddy, she whispered. I'll miss you too, Princess. Be good for Aunt Blanca, and remember that Daddy loves you more than anything in the world. Terry, who had been unusually quiet all morning, watched the departure with barely concealed anxiety. I wish you had discussed this with me first, she said as Blanca's car disappeared down the street. She's my daughter too, Terry. She'll be back in a few weeks. What Terry didn't know was that Blanca had instructions to keep Lily in California indefinitely, and that Damon had already initiated legal proceedings to establish temporary custody with his sister. By the time Terry realized what had happened, it would be too late. That afternoon, Floyd's surveillance team reported increased activity from both Terry and Reynaldo. They had met 3 times, always in different locations, and their conversations had grown increasingly urgent. They know something's changed, Floyd reported to Damon. Your wife has been making phone calls all day, and Bean's been driving around like he's checking for surveillance. Good. Let them sweat. Fear makes people careless. The final piece of Damon's plan involved Antoine Clay, a demolition expert who had worked on several of Schaefer Industries' projects. Antoine was a man who understood both the legal and illegal applications of explosives, and he owed Damon several favors from past business dealings. "I need you to set up a controlled demolition at the Route 7 site," Damon instructed Antoine. "Make it look like an industrial accident, but give me a safe zone where I can observe and escape if necessary." "Boss, this sounds dangerous. You sure you know what you're doing?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." As evening approached, Damon made his final preparations. He had equipped himself with a bulletproof vest, a concealed recording device, and a secure communication link to Floyd's team. The abandoned construction site on Route 7 was perfect for his purposes: isolated, filled with heavy machinery, and officially closed for safety violations. At 11:30 p.m., Damon arrived at the site and positioned himself in the main trailer, which had been rigged with Antoine's explosives. The demolition would be triggered remotely, giving him time to escape while ensuring that anyone else in the immediate area would not survive. Reynaldo arrived promptly at midnight, his car's headlights cutting through the darkness as he navigated the rough access road. He parked 50 yards from the trailer and approached cautiously, clearly nervous about the meeting. "Schaefer," he called out. "I'm here. Come into the trailer, Bean. We need privacy for this conversation." Reynaldo hesitated, then walked toward the trailer. As he climbed the metal steps, Damon activated his recording device. "I have to admit, I'm surprised you called me," Reynaldo said as he entered the trailer. "Last time we spoke, you threatened to destroy me." "I did destroy you," Damon replied coldly. "But circumstances change. I understand you've been spending time with my wife." Reynaldo's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the bullshit, Bean. I know about the affair. I know about the tracking device you had implanted in my daughter's head. I know about the insurance policy and the forged passport documents. You're fishing. You don't know anything. I know you're planning to kill me, steal my daughter, and disappear with $4 million. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Reynaldo's hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket, where Floyd's surveillance had confirmed he carried a .38 revolver. "The way I see it," Damon continued, "you have two choices. You can confess everything, provide evidence against my wife, and disappear from my life forever. Or you could try to complete your original plan and see what happens." "What kind of evidence?" "Recordings, documents, testimony. Everything I need to prove that Terry orchestrated this entire scheme." Reynaldo's hand stopped moving toward his weapon. "And if I cooperate, you get to live. You get enough money to start over somewhere far away. And you never see me or my family again. How do I know you won't kill me anyway?" Damon smiled coldly. "Because I'm not you, Bean. I don't murder people for money. I destroy them legally and completely." For a moment, it seemed as though Reynaldo might accept the offer. But then his hand resumed its movement toward his gun, and Damon knew that words were no longer sufficient. The next few seconds would determine whether Damon Schaefer lived or died. Chapter 6: Blood and Betrayal. Reynaldo's hand cleared his jacket pocket, the .38 revolver reflecting the dim light of the trailer's single bulb. But Damon had been expecting this moment, and his own weapon, a .45 automatic, was already in his hand. "Don't be stupid, Bean," Damon said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "You're not a killer. You're a coward who hides behind other people's plans. You destroyed my life." Reynaldo snarled, his gun shaking in his grip. "You took everything from me. I took what you tried to steal from me. There's a difference. After tonight, none of that will matter. Terry and I will have your daughter, your money, and your life." "No," Damon said quietly. "You won't." The standoff stretched for several seconds, both men holding their weapons steady. Then Reynaldo made his mistake. He glanced toward the trailer door, checking his escape route. Damon fired twice, both bullets hitting Reynaldo's center mass. The man dropped to the trailer floor, his revolver clattering across the metal surface. "Floyd, Phase 1 complete." Damon spoke into his communication device. "Initiate Phase 2. Outside the trailer, car headlights suddenly blazed alive. Terry's BMW pulled into the construction site, exactly as Damon had anticipated. She had been waiting nearby, ready to assist in his murder. Damon quickly moved Ronaldo's body to the corner of the trailer, then positioned himself where he could observe Terry's approach. She parked near Ronaldo's car and stepped out, carrying what appeared to be a gasoline can. "Ronaldo," she called out. "Is it finished? Come into the trailer." "Terry," Damon replied, disguising his voice in the darkness. "There's been a complication." Terry approached the trailer cautiously, the gasoline can sloshing in her grip. She climbed the steps and entered the doorway, where she froze at the sight of her husband sitting calmly in a chair, his gun resting on the table before him. "Hello, wife," Damon said, his voice carrying a weight of betrayal and rage. "I've been waiting for you." "Damon, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you had a tracking device implanted in our daughter's head? Can you explain the forged insurance policy? Can you explain why you're carrying gasoline to burn down the evidence of my murder?" Terry's composure cracked completely. "He made me do it. Ronaldo said it was the only way." "Where is he, Terry? Where's your lover?" She looked around the trailer wildly, then spotted Ronaldo's body in the corner. Her scream echoed through the metal structure. "He's dead, Terry, just like you're going to be. You can't kill me. I'm the mother of your child. You stopped being the mother of my child the moment you chose to betray her," Damon said, standing up slowly. "You were going to take her away from me. You were going to steal her life, her identity, her future. We weren't going to hurt her. We just needed her cooperation." "Cooperation? You violated her body, Terry. You had a foreign object surgically implanted in her head without her knowledge or consent. You turned our daughter into a tracked animal." The full horror of what she had done seemed to hit Terry for the first time. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you don't love her. You love money. You love excitement. You love the idea of destroying me. But you don't love our daughter." "That's not true." "Prove it," Damon challenged. "Tell me where the forged passport documents are. Tell me who else is involved in this conspiracy. Help me clean up the mess you've made." Terry stared at him for a long moment. Then her expression hardened. "Go to hell, Damon. Even if you kill me, you'll never prove I was involved in any of this." "I don't need to prove anything to anyone except myself," Damon replied. "And I already have all the evidence I need." He activated the recording device he had used with Ronaldo, playing back her confession about the tracking device and the insurance policy. Her own voice filled the trailer, damning her beyond any possibility of denial. "You recorded everything," she whispered. "Everything. Your affair, your plans, your motives. The police will find this recording along with all the other evidence I've gathered." "Then why kill me? Why not just turn me over to the authorities?" Damon's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because the authorities would give you a chance to see my daughter again. They would give you a chance to corrupt her, to poison her mind against me. They would give you a chance to hurt her again. I would never hurt Lily. You already have, Terry. You hurt her in the most fundamental way possible. And I will never forgive you for that." The final confrontation between husband and wife lasted only seconds. When it was over, Damon stood alone in the trailer with two bodies and the weight of absolute justice on his shoulders. He activated the demolition charges Antoine had placed throughout the site. The explosion would destroy the trailer and everything in it, making the deaths appear to be the result of an industrial accident. The insurance companies would investigate, but they would find no evidence of murder, only the tragic end of two people who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Damon walked away from the burning construction site, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. His enemies were dead, his daughter was safe, and justice had been served. The war was over. Chapter 7: Ashes and Absolution. The explosion lit up the Connecticut countryside like a small sun, visible for miles in every direction. By the time the fire department arrived, the construction site was a smoldering crater, and the trailer that had contained Damon's enemies was nothing more than twisted metal and ash. Damon watched the emergency response from a hill overlooking the site, his secure communication link crackling with updates from Floyd's team. The plan had worked perfectly. The demolition charges had destroyed all evidence of murder while creating a plausible industrial accident. "Boss," The fire marshal's initial assessment is calling it a gas leak explosion, Floyd reported. They're treating it as an accident pending investigation. Good. Make sure our cleanup team handles any loose ends. Already on it. The surveillance equipment has been removed and all our electronic traces have been wiped. Within hours, the story dominated local news. Construction site explosion kills two, the headlines read. Reynaldo Bean and Terry Schaefer, described as business associates reviewing property development, had been tragically killed in what appeared to be an industrial accident. Damon returned home to an empty house that felt more peaceful than it had in months. The silence was broken only by his phone ringing. Detective Cherry, calling with news of the explosion. Mr. Schaefer, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife was killed in an industrial accident tonight, Cherry said, his voice professionally sympathetic. She was at a construction site with a man named Reynaldo Bean when there was an explosion. My God, Damon replied, injecting just the right amount of shock into his voice. Are you certain it was Terry? We'll need you to make a formal identification, but yes, sir. I'm very sorry for your loss. I don't understand. What was she doing at a construction site? That's what we're trying to determine. Mr. Bean was apparently considering purchasing the property for development. Your wife may have been there in a professional capacity. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. The insurance companies, suspicious of the convenient timing of Terry's death, hired private investigators to look for evidence of fraud. They found nothing. Damon's planning had been too meticulous, his execution too perfect. More importantly, they discovered the evidence Damon had carefully planted for them. Bank records showing that Terry had been embezzling money from her husband's business accounts, forged documents indicating that she had been planning to flee the country, and communications suggesting that she had been involved in industrial espionage. It appears Mrs. Schaefer was not the woman you thought you married, Detective Cherry told Damon during one of their interviews. We found evidence that she was involved in some very serious criminal activities. I'm shocked, Damon replied. I thought I knew her completely. Unfortunately, Mr. Schaefer, people aren't always what they seem. The good news is that with both conspirators dead, your daughter is safe from any further threats. 3 weeks after the explosion, Damon flew to California to bring Lily home. His daughter, who had been told only that her mother had died in an accident, was struggling with grief and confusion. Daddy, why did Mommy have to die? She asked as they sat in Blanca's garden. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, Princess. But I want you to know that Mommy loved you very much, and she would want you to be happy. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. Lily would never know the truth about her mother's betrayal, about the tracking device, or about the plan to steal her away from her father. She would grow up believing that Terry had been a loving mother who died tragically, and Damon would make sure that fiction became her reality. Are we going to be okay, Daddy? We're going to be better than okay, Damon promised. We're going to be a family again. Chapter 8. The New Order. 6 months after the explosion, Damon had rebuilt his life according to his own rigid specifications. Lily had adjusted well to her new reality, aided by a carefully selected child psychologist who helped her process her grief without questioning the official version of events. The financial aftermath of Terry's death had been complex but ultimately favorable. The insurance companies, despite their suspicions, had been forced to pay out on her life insurance policy. Not the forged $4 million policy, which was discovered and voided, but her legitimate $500,000 policy that predated the conspiracy. Additionally, Damon had been able to recover the money she had stolen and hidden in various accounts. More satisfying still, the investigation into Terry's criminal activities had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond her affair with Reynaldo. The document forger, Christopher Ponce, had been arrested and was now serving a 10-year federal sentence. Several other accomplices had been identified and prosecuted, effectively dismantling the entire criminal enterprise. Boss, we've got a problem, Floyd announced during one of their regular security meetings. Reynaldo Bean had a brother, Delbert Bean. He's been asking questions about the explosion. Damon looked up from the construction contracts he had been reviewing. What kind of questions? He's been talking to reporters, private investigators, anyone who will listen. He's convinced that his brother was murdered. And what evidence does he have? None that we can identify. But he's persistent, and he's got enough money to cause trouble. Damon considered this development carefully. Delbert Bean had been a successful accountant who had managed to avoid being dragged down by his brother's failures. He was intelligent, methodical, and potentially dangerous if he continued his investigation. Set up a meeting with him, Damon decided. Let's see what he really wants. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Hartford. Delbert Bean was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who looked nothing like his deceased brother. Where Reynaldo had been stocky and aggressive, Delbert was precise and calculating, perhaps more dangerous in his own way. "Mr. Schaefer, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Delbert said, his voice carefully modulated. "I know this must be difficult, given that my brother died alongside your wife." "I'm still processing the tragedy myself," Damon replied. "What can I do for you?" "I've been investigating the circumstances of Reynaldo's death, and I've found some inconsistencies." Damon kept his expression neutral. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Financial records show that Reynaldo had been receiving regular payments from an offshore account. The payment stopped exactly 1 week before his death." "And you think this is significant?" "I think someone was paying my brother to do something, and when that something was completed, they eliminated him to cover their tracks." Damon studied Delbert's face, looking for tells and weaknesses. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "I have bank records, communication logs, and witness statements. I also have reason to believe that your wife was not the innocent victim she appeared to be." "Mr. Bean, I'm going to stop you right there," Damon said, his voice hardening. "My wife died in a tragic accident. Whatever theories you've developed about conspiracy or murder, you need to keep them to yourself. Or what? Or you'll discover that some investigations are more dangerous than others." Delbert leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Damon's face. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Schaefer. It's a warning. Your brother made the mistake of thinking he could destroy me once before. I wouldn't want you to repeat his errors." "So you admit there was bad blood between you and Reynaldo?" "I admit that your brother was a failed business partner who tried to steal from me. Beyond that, I have nothing more to say." Delbert stood up slowly, leaving a folder on the table. "Mr. Schaefer, I've compiled everything I've discovered about my brother's death. I'm going to continue investigating, and if I find evidence of foul play, I'll take it to the authorities." "That's your choice, Mr. Bean. But I'd suggest you be very careful about making accusations you can't prove." After Delbert left, Damon opened the folder and reviewed its contents. The man had been thorough, too thorough. He had identified several of the financial transactions that could potentially be traced back to Damon's operation, and he had even obtained witness statements from people who had seen Terry and Reynaldo together. "Floyd, we have a problem," Damon said during his next call. "Delbert Bean is more dangerous than his brother ever was." "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to make him understand that some investigations should be abandoned." Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 2 weeks after his meeting with Delbert Bean, Damon received a phone call that changed everything. It was Detective Cherry, and his voice carried a weight that immediately put Damon on alert. "Mr. Schaefer, I need you to come to the station. We have some new developments in your wife's case." "What kind of developments?" "I'd rather discuss this in person." An hour later, Damon sat across from Detective Cherry in the same interview room where they had first discussed the tracking device found in Lily's head. This time, however, the atmosphere was distinctly different. "Mr. Schaefer, we've received some new information about the explosion that killed your wife," Cherry began. "Information that suggests the incident may not have been accidental." "What kind of information?" "Delbert Bean has provided us with evidence that his brother was being blackmailed by someone with access to industrial explosives. He believes that person used Reynaldo to lure your wife to the construction site, then eliminated both of them." Damon kept his expression carefully neutral. "That's a very elaborate theory." "It's more than a theory. Mr. Bean has bank records showing regular payments from an offshore account, communications suggesting coercion, and witness statements placing both victims at the scene under suspicious circumstances." "Detective, I've already told you everything I know about my wife's activities. If she was involved in something illegal, I wasn't aware of it. Mr. Schaefer, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you have any involvement in the deaths of your wife and Reynaldo Bean? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Damon had been preparing for this moment since the night of the explosion, but actually facing it was different than he had anticipated. Detective, I love my wife despite our problems. I would never have hurt her. That's not what I asked you. Then let me be clear. I had no involvement in the explosion that killed my wife and Reynaldo Bean. It was technically true. Damon had not been involved in the explosion itself. He had been involved in the murders that preceded it, but the actual demolition had been carried out by remote detonation after he had left the scene. Mr. Schaefer, I need to inform you that you're a person of interest in this investigation. You have the right to legal representation. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but I would strongly advise you to retain counsel. That evening, Damon sat in his study, staring at the phone number for the best criminal defense attorney in the state. Ronald Gaines had built his reputation defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes, and he had never lost a murder case. But before making that call, Damon had another conversation to arrange. Floyd, I need you to set up a meeting with Delbert Bean. Tonight. Somewhere private. Boss, that's not a good idea. The police are watching him now. Then we'll have to be creative about it. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Hartford, chosen specifically because it was scheduled for demolition the following week. Delbert arrived alone, as instructed, but his nervous energy suggested he was prepared for trouble. Mr. Bean, thank you for coming, Damon said, emerging from the shadows. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. I'm wearing a wire, Delbert said immediately. If anything happens to me, the police will have everything they need. I'm sure you are, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? The kind that lets you walk away from this investigation alive and wealthy. Damon pulled out a briefcase and opened it, revealing neat stacks of $100 bills. $500,000, Mr. Bean. More than enough to start a new life somewhere far away from Connecticut. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to save your life. Your brother thought he could destroy me, and you see how that worked out for him. So you admit you killed him? I admit that people who threaten my family tend to have accidents. Your brother was planning to kidnap my daughter and kill me for insurance money. What would you have done in my position? Delbert stared at the money for several seconds. And if I take this and disappear, then you live happily ever after. You use the money to start over, and you never mention my name or my family again. And if I don't, then you'll discover that some investigations are more dangerous than others. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the briefcase full of money. Finally, Delbert reached out and closed the case. I'll need guarantees, he said. Written assurances that my safety will be protected. You'll have them. But understand this, Mr. Bean. If you ever try to renege on our agreement, if you ever come after me or my daughter again, there won't be enough money in the world to protect you. Understand? Good. Then we have a deal. 3 days later, Delbert Bean withdrew his cooperation from the police investigation and disappeared. Detective Cherry, lacking sufficient evidence to proceed without his key witness, was forced to close the case as an unsolved industrial accident. 6 months later, Damon Schaefer stood in his daughter's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully. Lily had grown taller, her blonde hair now reaching her shoulders, and she had developed the same steel-gray eyes that had served her father so well in business. She was safe, she was protected, and she would never know the truth about the monsters who had tried to steal her away. Damon had built his empire through ruthless efficiency and uncompromising principles. He had applied those same qualities to protecting his daughter, and the results spoke for themselves. His enemies were dead, his family was secure, and justice had been served according to his own unforgiving code. As he turned off the bedroom light and closed the door, Damon Schaefer felt the satisfaction of a man who had won the most important war of his life. He had lost a wife, but she had never truly been his. He had gained something far more valuable, the absolute certainty that his daughter would grow up safe, loved, and free from the corruption that had nearly destroyed their family. The war was over. The victory was complete. And Damon Schaefer had proven once again that he was a man who never forgave and never forgot, but always protected what mattered most. In the end, And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Homecoming. The weight of the surprise lifted from Nolan Barrett's shoulders as he pulled into the driveway of his suburban Chicago home. After 6 weeks overseeing construction projects across Europe, he'd managed to finish early. He hadn't told Melissa he was coming home. Their 15th anniversary was tomorrow, and he wanted to surprise her. The December chill bit through his suit as he retrieved his luggage from the trunk. Their 2-story colonial stood quiet against the afternoon sky, unusual for a Thursday. Normally, Melissa would be at her interior design studio until 6, and their daughter Lila at volleyball practice. Nolan smiled, fishing out his house key. The quiet would give him time to prepare. He'd picked up Melissa's favorite chocolates in Belgium and a small music box from Prague. The anniversary plans could still work, even with his early arrival. The house was oddly silent as he stepped inside. No television, no music, just the quiet hum of the heater. Nolan frowned, setting his bags down in the foyer. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the first floor. Nothing. He checked his watch, 2:15 p.m. Lila should be in school, but Melissa typically worked from home on Thursdays. Her car was in the garage. As he moved toward the kitchen, soft whispers floated down from upstairs. Nolan froze, hand instinctively tightening around his keys. A man's voice, barely audible, followed by Melissa's unmistakable laugh. The whispers faded into silence. Blood rushed to Nolan's face as reality crashed against him. He was about to head upstairs when movement caught his eye. Lila appeared at the top of the staircase, her eyes widening in surprise. "Daddy," the 13-year-old gasped, clutching her phone to her chest. "You shouldn't be here." Nolan forced a smile. "I finished early. Want to surprise your mom. Why aren't you at school?" Lila descended the stairs slowly, her face pale. "I had a half day. Teacher conferences." Something in her expression didn't match her words. She reached the bottom step and glanced nervously toward the upper floor. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mommy said you're never coming back." The words hit Nolan like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? I was only gone for work." Lila's eyes welled with tears. "She told Uncle Porter you were leaving us for good." Uncle Porter, Melissa's cousin, who'd been visiting more frequently over the past year. The cousin who'd comforted Melissa through her father's death last summer. The cousin whose whispers Nolan now recognized. Without another word, Nolan moved past Lila and took the stairs 2 at a time. The master bedroom door was closed. He pushed it open without hesitation. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Melissa scrambled to cover herself with the sheets while Porter Dawson leapt from the bed, frantically grabbing for his discarded clothes. "Nolan!" Melissa gasped. "This isn't." "Don't." Nolan cut her off, his voice eerily calm. The rage building inside him was cold, calculating. He turned to Porter, who was struggling to pull on his pants. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my house." Porter stammered. "Listen, man, we need to talk about." 25 seconds. Something in Nolan's eyes must have conveyed the fury beneath his controlled exterior. Porter grabbed his shirt and shoes and hurried past him, not bothering to finish dressing. Melissa clutched the sheets tighter. "Nolan, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. This woman, with whom he'd built a life, born a child, created a home, was suddenly foreign to him. His eyes drifted to the nightstand where her phone lay, screen still illuminated. A text message preview caught his attention. "Divorce papers ready. Sign tomorrow. And won't contest with the evidence we have." Evidence? Nolan's mind raced. What evidence? And tomorrow, their anniversary. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The whispered conversations he'd overheard on phone calls. The business trips Melissa had taken with Porter to scout locations for her design clients. The unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. This wasn't just an affair. This was a coup. How long? He asked, his voice hollow. Nolan, we need to talk when you're calmer. This isn't. How long? Melissa's shoulders slumped. A year. But it's complicated. A year. A third of their daughter's life. Nearly 15,000 hours of lies. The sound of a door slamming downstairs broke the moment. Porter leaving. Or Lila. Escaping the implosion of her family. Nolan took a deep breath. Get dressed. We're going to have a conversation, and you're going to tell me exactly what you and Porter have been planning. As Melissa scrambled for her clothes, Nolan pulled out his phone and did something he'd never imagined doing. He called the police. I need to report a breaking and entering, he stated calmly when the dispatcher answered. And I have reason to believe the intruder and my wife were conspiring to harm me. Chapter 2. Unraveling. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Deandra Washington took Nolan's statement in the living room while her partner interviewed Melissa in the kitchen. Lila had disappeared to a neighbor's house. Nolan had texted their trusted family friend, Beverly Thomason, to look after her until things settled. So you're saying you believe your wife and this man were conspiring against you? Officer Washington clarified, her pen poised above her notepad. Nolan nodded. I saw a text message about divorce papers and evidence. Given the circumstances of my daughter's comment that I was never coming back, I have reason to believe there might be something more sinister at play. Washington's expression remained professional, but her eyes reflected sympathy. Mr. Barrett, finding your spouse in a compromising position is traumatic. Sometimes we jump to worst-case scenarios. I understand how it sounds, Nolan replied. But I'd like you to check if there have been any unusual financial transactions or insurance policies taken out in my name recently. The officer studied him for a moment before nodding. We'll look into it. From the kitchen, Melissa's voice rose in protest. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly believe he just happened to come home early today. He's setting me up. Nolan almost laughed at the absurdity. He pulled out his phone and showed Officer Washington his email exchanges with his project manager and flight information. My return wasn't planned until next week. I finished early and wanted to surprise my wife for our anniversary. The officer reviewed the emails and nodded. These appear legitimate. What followed was a 4-hour process of statements, questions, and arrangements. Nolan requested and received an emergency protective order based on his concerns. The officers advised Melissa to gather essentials and stay elsewhere while the situation was investigated. This is my house, too. Melissa protested as she packed a suitcase under Officer Washington's watchful eye. The house is solely in my name, Nolan responded quietly. My grandfather left it to me before we were married. It was a detail Melissa had always resented. Nolan's unwillingness to add her to the deed despite her numerous renovations to the historic property. Now, he was grateful for his grandfather's foresight. After Melissa left, escorted by the second officer, Washington handed Nolan her card. We'll look into the financial angles you mentioned, she said. In the meantime, document everything. Change your passwords. And consider speaking with an attorney first thing tomorrow. When Nolan was finally alone, the full weight of the day crashed down on him. He sank onto the sofa, hands trembling for the first time. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt contaminated. His phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. Lila's okay. She's asleep now. Call me when you can. He dialed immediately. Nolan, Beverly answered, her voice gentle. How are you holding up? I've been better, he admitted. How's Lila? Beverly hesitated. She's confused. Scared. She told me some things you should know. I'm listening. She overheard Melissa and Porter talking last week. Something about insurance money and making it look like an accident during your trip. Nolan, she was afraid to tell you because Melissa convinced her it was just a joke. Ice formed in Nolan's veins. Did she mention this to the police? No. She only told me after they left. She's terrified. Keep her there tonight, Nolan said. I need to handle something. After hanging up, Nolan went to his home office and unlocked the hidden safe behind his collection of architecture books. Inside was an old leather journal that had belonged to his father, a federal prosecutor who'd made enemies of dangerous people before his mysterious death 20 years ago. Nolan had never followed his father's path into law enforcement, choosing construction and development instead, but he'd inherited Lawrence Barrett's meticulous mind and contingency planning. He opened the journal to a page marked insurance and began to read his father's advice on handling betrayal. By midnight, he had planned. The next morning, Nolan met with Vivian Rosario, a formidable divorce attorney whose reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned. "This isn't just about ending a marriage," Nolan explained after recounting the previous day's events. "I believe my wife and her lover were plotting something more dangerous." Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Barrett, which is why I need your help to uncover what they were planning while protecting myself and my daughter." Vivian's expression hardened. "Let's say I believe you. What do you want the outcome to be?" Nolan considered the question carefully. "Justice, protection for my daughter, and to ensure they never benefit from what they were planning." "Very well," Vivian nodded, sliding a contract across her desk. "Let's begin." Chapter 3: Buried Truths. 3 days after discovering Melissa's betrayal, Nolan sat across from Detective Tomas Reeves in a Spartan interview room at the Chicago PD. The preliminary investigation into Nolan's claims had uncovered disturbing evidence. "We found several concerning items," Detective Reeves explained, opening a folder. "First, a life insurance policy for $5 million taken out on you 6 months ago, with your wife as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork has your signature, but it's forged," Nolan finished. "I never signed anything like that." Reeves nodded. "Our document examiner agrees." "Second, we found communications between your wife and Mr. Dawson discussing what appears to be a plan to sabotage your car before your drive to the airport for your recent business trip." Nolan's throat tightened. "They were going to kill me. It appears that way. The messages are coded, but when combined with the life insurance policy and statements from your daughter about overheard conversations, we have enough to bring them in for questioning." "Have they been arrested?" "Not yet. We're building the case carefully. Your wife has hired Winston Caldwell as her attorney." Nolan recognized the name, one of Chicago's most expensive criminal defense lawyers. "How is she affording him?" "That's another interesting discovery." Reeves slid another document across the table. "Your wife has been transferring funds from your joint accounts to a private account for over a year. Nearly $300,000. The betrayal deepened with each revelation. Nolan had trusted Melissa completely with their finances, focusing on his growing construction business while she handled their personal accounts. "There's more," Reeves continued. "Mr. Dawson isn't actually your wife's cousin." Nolan looked up sharply. "What?" "Porter Dawson is actually Peter Donovan. He changed his name 7 years ago after serving time for fraud in Arizona. We believe he and Melissa met long before she introduced him as her cousin last year." The detective slid a photo across the table. A much younger Melissa with her arm around a man Nolan recognized as Porter, but with different hair and no beard. "This was taken 12 years ago at a bar in Phoenix. Before you met her." Nolan stared at the image, memories reshuffling in his mind. Melissa had claimed to be from Seattle when they met. She'd said her family was all dead except for a few distant relatives. Porter had appeared last year, introduced as a cousin she'd reconnected with after her father's funeral. It had all been lies. "We've been married for 14 years, Nolan said quietly. "Was any of it real?" Detective Reeves didn't answer. He didn't need to. After leaving the police station, Nolan drove to Beverly's house to see Lila. His daughter had been staying there since the confrontation, too upset to return home or see her mother, who'd been trying desperately to contact her. When Lila saw him, she ran into his arms. At 13, she was usually too cool for such displays, but trauma had stripped away the teenage facade. "Did Mom really want to hurt you?" she asked, her face pressed against his chest. Nolan stroked her hair. "There's a lot happening that you don't need to worry about right now. I'm safe, and you're safe. That's what matters." Later, after Lila had gone to watch TV with Beverly's daughter, Beverly handed Nolan a cup of coffee and sat beside him at her kitchen island. "There's something else you should know," she said hesitantly. "Something Lila told me that she was afraid to tell the police." Nolan braced himself. "What is it?" "Melissa has been taking her to visit a woman named Audrey in Milwaukee every few months. She told Lila it was her great aunt, but made her promise never to mention these visits to you. I've never heard of any Audrey, Nolan frowned. Lila said the last time they visited, about a month ago, she overheard Melissa and Audrey arguing about the plan and whether you deserved what was coming. Audrey apparently said something like, "Just because Lawrence ruined everything doesn't mean his son should pay." Nolan froze. She mentioned my father? By name. Beverly nodded. Lila thought it was strange too, since she knew your dad died before you met Melissa. Nolan's mind raced. His father, Lawrence Barrett, had been investigating a major financial conspiracy before his accident. The case had officially remained unsolved, though Lawrence's colleagues had their suspicions about who was responsible. I need Audrey's last name and address. Lila didn't know her last name, but she remembered the building. It was called Lakeside Towers on Milwaukee's waterfront. That night, after ensuring Lila was settled at Beverly's for another few days, Nolan returned home and went straight to his father's journal. He flipped through pages of notes until he found what he was looking for, a list of suspects from Lawrence's final case. Halfway down the page, Audrey Whitlock, financial consultant, possible money launderer for Donovan operation. Donovan, the same last name as Porter's original identity. The connections were becoming clear, forming a picture more disturbing than Nolan could have imagined. This wasn't just about Melissa's affair or a scheme to collect insurance money. This was about revenge against his father, extended to his son. Nolan closed the journal and reached for his phone. He had calls to make, plans to set in motion. The betrayal he'd uncovered went deeper than his marriage. It stretched back decades, rooted in his father's unfinished work. For the first time since discovering Melissa's infidelity, Nolan felt something beyond shock and pain. He felt purpose, determination. Melissa, Porter, and whoever else was involved wouldn't just face justice through the system. They would face him. And unlike his father, Nolan wouldn't be caught unprepared. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he needed. Caleb Weston, his former college roommate who now worked for a private security firm after years with military intelligence. "Caleb," he said when his friend answered. "I need your help." Chapter 4, Shadows of the Past. Caleb Weston arrived at Nolan's house just after midnight, carrying a nondescript duffel bag and the same intense, focused Nolan remembered from their college days. Now in his early 40s like Nolan, Caleb's military background showed in his precise movements and observant eyes that missed nothing. "Your place might be bugged," were his first words after Nolan let him in. "Let's talk outside." They settled on the back patio, where the January cold kept their conversation private beneath the hum of patio heaters. "Start from the beginning," Caleb instructed, setting up a small electronic device that emitted a low-frequency pulse, a counter-surveillance measure. Nolan recounted everything, discovering Melissa with Porter, the insurance policy, the connection to his father's old case, and Audrey Whitlock in Milwaukee. Caleb listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer. When Nolan finished, he leaned forward. "Your father was investigating the Donovan family when he died," Caleb stated. "They controlled one of the largest financial fraud operations in the Midwest in the early 2000s. Victor Donovan was the patriarch, but after he went to prison, his brother Richard took over. They specialized in long cons." "Long cons?" Nolan asked. "Schemes that take years to execute. Infiltrating targets' lives, gaining trust, then striking when everything's in place." Caleb's eyes met Nolan's, like marrying someone for their inheritance or position. The implication hit Nolan like a physical blow. "You think Melissa was placed in my life? We met by chance at a charity event." "Was it chance?" Caleb challenged. "Or did she know exactly where you'd be, what you liked, how to approach you?" Nolan thought back to that night 14 years ago. Melissa had bumped into him at the bar, spilling her drink. She'd been apologetic, charming. They discovered shared interests in architecture and design. It had seemed so natural. "I need to know for sure," Nolan said finally. "Then we investigate," Caleb replied, starting with Audrey Whitlock. 2 days later, they arrived in Milwaukee. Caleb had arranged surveillance of Lakeside Towers and confirmed that Audrey Whitlock, 65, occupied a penthouse apartment. She lived alone, had daily visits from a home health aide, and left only for weekly doctor appointments. She's dying, Caleb reported as they sat in a rented SUV with tinted windows across from the building. Terminal cancer. Her medical records show 6 months tops. Nolan processed this information. A dying woman has nothing to lose. Could make her dangerous or willing to talk. Exactly why we need to approach carefully. Caleb handed Nolan a small device. Wear this. It'll record everything and transmit to my secure server. Their plan was simple but effective. Caleb, posing as a home healthcare supervisor, would gain access to Audrey's apartment for a routine evaluation. Once inside, he would secure the space for Nolan to enter. The execution was flawless. Within 40 minutes, Nolan found himself standing in Audrey Whitlock's elegant living room, facing an emaciated woman seated in a motorized wheelchair by the window overlooking Lake Michigan. "I've been expecting someone from the Barrett family," Audrey said, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. "Though I thought it would be federal agents, not Lawrence's son himself." Nolan remained standing, keeping his distance. "You know who I am?" "Of course. I helped select you as the target." She gestured weakly to a side table with a crystal decanter. "Pour yourself a drink. This conversation will require it." Nolan didn't move. "I'm not here for hospitality." Audrey's thin lips curved into a smile. "No, you're here for answers. About your wife, Peter Donovan, and why your father's case has reached out from the grave to destroy your life. Start talking." "Very well." Audrey adjusted her position slightly, wincing. "Your father was close to exposing a network that had infiltrated banking systems across 5 states. The Donovan operation wasn't just about money. It was about power, influence. Richard Donovan had judges, police, even a senator in his pocket. And you were their financial consultant." "I was the architect," Audrey corrected. "Richard was the face, but I designed the systems." "What does this have to do with Melissa?" Audrey's expression softened slightly. "Melissa is Richard's daughter. Her real name is Melissa Donovan. When your father's investigation got too close, Richard authorized your father's assassination." Though Nolan had suspected something like this, hearing it confirmed made his knees weak. He finally took that drink, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey with a steady hand that belied his inner turmoil. "After your father's death, the investigation faltered," Audrey continued. "But Richard was paranoid. He worried that Lawrence Barrett might have left evidence somewhere, passed information to his son. The plan was to place Melissa in your life, gain your trust completely, and search for any evidence while monitoring you." "For 14 years?" Nolan asked incredulously. "We have a child together." Audrey's eyes flashed with something like regret. "The original plan was 3 years, maximum. Melissa was supposed to find any hidden evidence, then divorce you and move on. But something unexpected happened." "What?" "2 things, actually. First, you inherited your grandfather's construction company and properties, making you suddenly very wealthy. Second," Audrey hesitated, "Melissa fell in love with you. Genuinely. She deviated from the plan." Nolan scoffed. "If that were true, I wouldn't be here now. For almost 10 years, she refused to complete her assignment. She built a life with you, had Lila, seemed to forget her purpose." Audrey took a labored breath. "Then Richard was diagnosed with terminal cancer 3 years ago. Before dying, he called in his daughter's debt, reminded her of family loyalty. And Peter Donovan, her cousin, Richard's sister's son, he was sent to bring Melissa back in line, remind her of her obligations. They were close as children." Audrey's mouth twisted. "The affair was a bonus, I suppose. Peter always wanted what others had." Nolan paced the room, processing. "So the plan changed from finding evidence to collecting insurance money?" "Richard left his children nothing but debts and obligations. Peter convinced Melissa that a clean solution was needed. Your death, the insurance payout, a fresh start." Audrey's voice had grown weaker. "I advised against it. Old schemes, properly executed, leave no evidence. Murder investigations never truly close." "Why are you telling me all this?" Audrey gestured to her withered body. "I'm beyond consequences now. And I've had time to reflect on the lives we've destroyed. Not enough for redemption, perhaps, but enough to want certain truths known before I die. I need proof, Nolan said. Something I can use. Audrey nodded toward a painting on the far wall. Behind that is a safe. Combination 18-42-7. Inside you'll find a flash drive with banking records, communications, everything that connects the Donovans to your father's death and the current plot against you. Nolan followed her instructions, finding the safe and the drive exactly as described. When he turned back, Audrey's eyes had drifted to the window again. One more thing, she said quietly. Lila is innocent in all this. Whatever you do to Melissa and Peter, remember that the child loves both her parents. Nolan pocketed the drive. I don't need parenting advice from someone who helped orchestrate my father's murder and my own planned death. As he turned to leave, Audrey called after him. Barrett, there's something else you should know. Richard had another child. A son. He's not part of this current plan, but he'll come for you if you destroy his sister and cousin. I'll be ready, Nolan replied, closing the door behind him. Outside, Caleb was waiting in the hallway. Got everything? Nolan patted his pocket where the flash drive sat. Everything and more. Let's go. Back in Chicago, Nolan and Caleb reviewed the contents of the flash drive. It contained decades of records, bank statements, emails, photographs, and most damning of all, a video of Richard Donovan discussing Lawrence Barrett's removal with men Caleb identified as known hitmen from that era. This is enough to reopen your father's case, Caleb said, and to put Melissa and Peter away for conspiracy to commit murder. Not yet, Nolan replied, staring at a wedding photo of him and Melissa. In it, her smile appeared genuine, loving. Had any of it been real? I want them to face justice, but delivering this to the police doesn't feel like enough. What are you thinking? Nolan closed the laptop. They took 14 years of my life. They made me love a lie. They were willing to orphan our daughter for money. His voice hardened. Before the law takes them, I want them to lose everything, just like they planned for me. Caleb studied his friend carefully. Revenge is a dangerous game, Nolan. It's not just revenge, Nolan countered. It's justice. For my father. For me. For Lila, who'll grow up knowing her mother was willing to kill her father. After a moment, Caleb nodded. What's your plan? Nolan opened his father's journal again. Dad always said the best way to defeat your enemies is to understand them better than they understand themselves. He looked up at Caleb. I'm going to become Melissa and Peter's worst nightmare. The man who knows all their secrets and can anticipate their every move. Chapter 5. The Architect's Gambit. Over the next 2 weeks, Nolan immersed himself in the evidence from Audrey's flash drive, constructing a complete picture of the Donovan family's operations, past and present. He worked from a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel, having swept it for bugs with Caleb's equipment. The distance from his contaminated home provided clarity. What emerged was a complex web of deceit spanning generations. The Donovans had built their criminal enterprise on targeting wealthy individuals through long-term infiltration. Sometimes it was marriage, other times friendship or business partnerships. Their patience was their greatest asset. Melissa wasn't their only plant, Nolan explained to Caleb as they reviewed documents. There are at least 5 other Donovan family members currently embedded with wealthy targets. We should alert authorities, Caleb suggested. These people are in danger. We will, Nolan assured him. But first, I need to handle Melissa and Peter my way. The foundation of Nolan's plan lay in understanding his wife better than she understood herself. After 14 years together, he knew her habits, fears, and weaknesses. Combined with the information from the flash drive, he had a comprehensive psychological profile. Melissa feared poverty above all else. Having grown up in the shadow of her father's criminal empire, she'd experienced both extreme wealth and sudden destitution when operations were disrupted. Her materialism wasn't mere greed. It was a desperate attempt to create security. Peter, meanwhile, was driven by resentment. Always in the shadow of his Uncle Richard and cousin Melissa, he'd spent his life trying to prove himself worthy of the Donovan name. His prison stint had further embittered him, making him reckless and vindictive. They're still trying to access our accounts, Nolan noted, showing Caleb the alerts from his bank security system. 3 attempts yesterday alone. They're getting desperate, Caleb observed. The police investigation has them spooked, but they still need money to pay that high-priced lawyer. Nolan smiled coldly. Perfect. It's time to give them what they want. The next day, Nolan met with his personal banker, Hartford Pullman, a distinguished man in his 60s who had managed the Barrett family's finances for decades. I need to arrange something unusual, Nolan explained after ensuring their conversation was private. I want to appear financially vulnerable. Hartford's eyebrows rose. In what way exactly? I want to create the illusion that my business is failing, that I'm liquidating assets to cover losses. May I ask why? Nolan provided a carefully edited version of the truth, enough for Hartford to understand the gravity without compromising the legal case being built. I see, the banker said thoughtfully. We can structure a series of transactions that would create that appearance without actually putting your assets at risk. A financial mirage, if you will. Exactly. And I need it to be convincing enough to fool someone with financial expertise who's motivated to find weakness. With Hartford's help, Nolan began implementing the first phase of his plan, creating a financial house of cards that would lure Melissa and Peter into action. To anyone examining his finances, it would appear that Nolan's construction company was hemorrhaging money on failed projects, forcing him to sell properties and withdraw from investments. Simultaneously, he engaged Vivian Rosario to draft divorce papers with very specific terms. These are unusually generous, Vivian noted, reviewing Nolan's proposed settlement, especially given the circumstances. They need to be believable, Nolan explained. Melissa knows I'd fight for custody of Lila, but she also knows I'd sacrifice almost anything to give our daughter stability. The proposed settlement offered Melissa the family home, a substantial monthly alimony, and shared custody of Lila. In exchange, Nolan would retain full ownership of his business and certain investment accounts. She'll see this as a victory, Nolan continued. She gets immediate assets while I keep long-term investments that appear to be failing anyway. Vivian's expression was skeptical. And what happens when she accepts? She won't, Nolan said confidently. Not yet. She'll want more. And that's when we'll give her exactly what she thinks she wants. The third component of Nolan's plan involved Lila. After careful consideration and consultation with a child psychologist, Nolan had a difficult conversation with his daughter about what was happening. Mom and I are going through some very serious problems, he explained as they sat in his hotel suite. Some of it involved bad decisions she's made. Lila's eyes were serious beyond her 13 years. Is Mom going to jail? Nolan chose his words carefully. There's an investigation happening. I don't know what will happen yet. Because of what she and Uncle Porter, or whatever his name is, were planning to do to you. Yes, Nolan confirmed, impressed by her perception. How do you feel about that? Lila looked down at her hands. Scared, confused, but also angry. How could she even think about hurting you? About making me not have a dad anymore? Nolan pulled her into a hug. I promise you'll always have me, no matter what happens with the investigation or between your mother and me. I don't want to stay with her, Lila said firmly. Not right now. I understand, but I need your help with something important. Nolan explained that for the next few weeks, he wanted Lila to continue staying with Beverly, but to have supervised visits with Melissa. During these visits, she shouldn't mention anything about Nolan's current activities or whereabouts. It's not about lying, he clarified. It's about privacy until some legal matters are resolved. Lila nodded solemnly. I can do that. With all pieces in place, Nolan initiated contact with Melissa for the first time since the confrontation. He arranged to meet at her lawyer's office, where he delivered the proposed divorce settlement in person. Melissa looked thinner, her designer outfit and perfect makeup unable to hide the strain of the past weeks. When she saw Nolan, a complex mixture of emotions crossed her face. Guilt, anger, calculation, and something that might have been genuine regret. Nolan, she began, her voice soft. Save it, he interrupted. I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here to end our marriage as efficiently as possible. Winston Caldwell, Melissa's attorney, reviewed the settlement with a frown. These terms are surprisingly reasonable, Mr. Barrett. I just want this over with, Nolan replied, projecting exhaustion and defeat. The business is in trouble. I don't have the energy for a prolonged legal battle. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. What happened with the European projects? Complications. Cost overruns. The usual problems compounded by my absence. Nolan shrugged. I should have been there instead of coming home early that day. The irony of his statement hung in the air between them. I'll need time to review these terms with my client, Caldwell stated professionally. Take all the time you need, Nolan replied, standing to leave. Meanwhile, I've arranged for Melissa to have supervised visits with Lila at Beverly's house. The details are in the paperwork. As he turned to go, Melissa called after him. Nolan, wait. What about the police investigation? The allegations you made? He looked back at her, his expression carefully blank. That's between you and the authorities. This divorce is separate. As he walked out, Nolan knew Melissa wouldn't accept the settlement immediately. She'd consult with Peter. They'd investigate his financial situation and discover exactly what he wanted them to find. Vulnerability, distraction, and opportunity. Back at the hotel, Caleb was waiting with updates on their surveillance of Peter Donovan. He met with someone interesting today, Caleb reported, showing Nolan photographs of Peter with a severe-looking man outside a downtown parking garage. Desmond Lynch, former enforcer for several Chicago crime families, now works freelance. Specializes in making problems disappear. Nolan studied the image. They're getting impatient. The police investigation and frozen accounts have them cornered, which makes them dangerous, Caleb warned. We should consider bringing in law enforcement now. Not yet, Nolan insisted. First, I need them to make one more move, the one that will destroy them completely. That night, Nolan made a call to Detective Reeves, providing a carefully controlled update while withholding key information about his own activities. I've hired private security, he explained, given the potential threat. Smart move, Reeves acknowledged. We're building our case, but these investigations take time. The insurance fraud is solid, but proving murder conspiracy is trickier. I understand. Just keep me updated. After hanging up, Nolan turned to Caleb. How soon can we implement the final phase? The technical aspects are ready, Caleb confirmed. But are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Nolan looked at the wall where he'd pinned photographs of his father, Lila, and even one of him and Melissa on their wedding day. In that moment, he felt the last traces of love for his wife evaporate, replaced by cold determination. I'm sure, he said. They took everything from my father. They try to take everything from me. Now it's their turn to lose. Chapter 6, Checkmate. The Barrett-Donovan chess match accelerated over the next week. As Nolan had predicted, Melissa rejected the initial settlement offer, countering with demands for additional assets. Specifically, an interest in Nolan's grandfather's trust fund that had been established for future generations. She's getting greedy, Vivian observed during their strategy meeting, which means she's getting nervous. Exactly as planned, Nolan replied. Her lawyer must be charging a fortune, and with their assets frozen during the investigation, they're running out of options. The counterproposal provided Nolan the opening he needed. He requested a direct meeting with Melissa, no lawyers present, at a neutral location. They met at an upscale restaurant with private dining rooms, the kind of establishment where discretion was paramount. Melissa arrived in a black dress that Nolan recognized. He'd given it to her for their 10th anniversary. The choice wasn't accidental. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. I've missed you. Nolan maintained a neutral expression. This isn't a reconciliation, Melissa. It's negotiation. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course. Business first. For the next hour, they discussed the divorce terms. Nolan strategically appeared to concede on certain points while firmly rejecting others, particularly regarding the trust fund. That money is for Lila's future, he insisted. It's non-negotiable. I understand protecting Lila, Melissa replied, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He pulled away. But you know I only want what's fair after 14 years together. Fair. Nolan felt genuine anger rise. Was it fair when you and Peter planned to collect my life insurance? Was that for Lila's future too? Melissa's expression hardened momentarily before softening into calculated remorse. Those allegations are absurd, and you know it. Peter and I made a terrible mistake with the affair, but we never planned to harm you. Then explain the insurance policy with my forged signature. I was trying to protect our family, she countered smoothly. You travel constantly for work, often to dangerous construction sites. I wanted security if something happened. And the text about evidence, about me never coming back? For a moment, Melissa faltered. Then her expression shifted to something Nolan had rarely seen. Cold calculation without pretense. You want the truth, Nolan? Fine. When I realized you discovered the affair, I panicked. Peter suggested we could use certain irregularities in your business practices as leverage in a divorce. The evidence was some questionable transaction records Peter found while helping me organize the home office. It was a clever pivot, admitting to a lesser offense to cover the greater one. If Nolan hadn't seen the flash drive contents, he might have even believed her. What business irregularities? He asked, feigning concern. Melissa shrugged elegantly. Tax discrepancies, mainly. Nothing criminal, just aggressive deductions. But enough to make a divorce messy if exposed. Nolan allowed worry to show on his face. I see. Sensing advantage, Melissa pressed forward. I'll tell you what. Keep the trust fund intact for Lila. Instead, give me the Madison Street properties. They're underperforming anyway, according to your last portfolio review. The Madison Street properties were among Nolan's most valuable assets, though recent financial reports, artificially manipulated, showed them operating at a loss. I need to think about that, Nolan replied cautiously. Those properties have been in my family for generations. But they're draining your resources now, Melissa countered. Consider it a clean break. You get your irregularities back. I get the properties. Lila's trust remains untouched, and we can all move forward. By the end of dinner, Nolan had projected enough reluctance and vulnerability that Melissa believed she'd won a major concession. They agreed to have their lawyers draft a revised agreement incorporating the Madison Street properties in exchange for Melissa withdrawing all claims to the trust fund and other business assets. As they prepared to leave, Melissa touched his arm again. For what it's worth, Nolan, not everything was a lie. I did love you. Part of me still does. Nolan looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had gazed at him with apparent adoration for 14 years. The same eyes that had watched him leave for Europe, possibly never to return if her plans had succeeded. That's the tragedy, isn't it? He replied quietly. I'll never know what was real and what wasn't. Back at his hotel, Nolan updated Caleb on the meeting's outcome. She took the bait, he confirmed. Now we wait for her to bring Peter into the equation. They didn't have to wait long. Their surveillance captured Melissa meeting Peter at his apartment that same night. Through listening devices Caleb had planted, they heard the entire conversation. He's giving up the Madison properties, Melissa reported triumphantly. Once those are transferred to me, we'll have the collateral we need. For what? Peter asked. To disappear. The police investigation isn't going away. That detective keeps digging into the insurance policy. We need to cash out and vanish before they put everything together. Peter's voice grew cautious. What about Lynch? He's expecting payment for the Barrett problem. Tell him plans have changed. We don't need those services anymore. The properties are worth 10 times what we would have gotten from the insurance anyway. And Lila, Melissa paused. She'll be better off with Nolan while we establish ourselves somewhere new. Once we're settled, I'll find a way to bring her to us. The conversation confirmed what Nolan had suspected. They were planning to liquidate the properties and flee the country. It was the final piece he needed. The next morning, Nolan contacted Hartford Pullman with instructions to prepare the necessary documents for transferring the Madison Street properties. Simultaneously, he reached out to Detective Reeves. I have reason to believe Melissa and Peter Donovan are planning to flee the jurisdiction, he reported. And I've obtained new evidence connecting them to a larger criminal organization. Reeves was skeptical. What evidence? I prefer to deliver it in person, Nolan replied, along with additional information about my father's murder in 2003. The detective's tone changed immediately. Your father's case? Are you saying there's a connection? A direct one. I can be at the station tomorrow morning with everything. That evening, Nolan met with Vivian to review the transfer documents for the Madison properties. The papers appeared legitimate, transferring full ownership to Melissa Barrett with no encumbrances or restrictions. These look completely standard, Vivian noted. No hidden clauses, no delayed transfer mechanisms. Exactly as they should, Nolan confirmed. Melissa and her lawyer need to believe this is a straightforward transfer. And the actual arrangement? Nolan smiled. Is documented in separate paperwork that will be filed simultaneously by Hartford. It's completely legal, I assure you. The final meeting was scheduled for 2 days later at Vivian's office. Enough time for Melissa and Peter to make arrangements, but not enough for them to execute an escape before the transfer was complete. When the day arrived, Nolan entered the conference room where Melissa, Winston Caldwell, and Vivian were already seated. He carried a slim portfolio containing the transfer documents. Before we begin, Nolan announced, I'd like to clarify that these properties represent a clean break between us. Once signed, our financial entanglements will be completely severed. That's our understanding as well, Caldwell confirmed, eyeing the portfolio eagerly. Melissa smiled, confidence radiating from her. I appreciate your reasonableness, Nolan. This is best for everyone. I agree, Nolan replied, opening the portfolio and sliding the documents across the table. Best for everyone. As Melissa and her lawyer reviewed the papers, there was a knock at the conference room door. Detective Reeves entered, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. Melissa Donovan, Peter Donovan, Reeves announced, nodding toward the window where Peter could be seen in the waiting area, pacing nervously. You're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Melissa's face drained of color. What is this? Nolan, what have you done? Justice, Nolan replied simply. For my father. For myself. For Lila. As the officers entered the room to execute the arrest, Nolan placed a flash drive on the table. Detective Reeves, this contains evidence connecting Melissa and Peter Donovan to the murder of federal prosecutor Lawrence Barrett in 2003, as well as their recent conspiracy to kill me for insurance money. Melissa lunged for the drive, but one of the officers restrained her. You can't do this, she hissed at Nolan. You have no proof. Actually, I have everything, including recordings of your conversation with Peter 2 nights ago about fleeing the country with the proceeds from the Madison properties. Winston Caldwell stood abruptly. My client has nothing further to say. We'll address these outrageous allegations in court. As Melissa was handcuffed, she fixed Nolan with a venomous glare. This isn't over. Richard had more children than just me. They'll come for you. I'm counting on it, Nolan replied calmly. After Melissa and Peter were escorted out, Detective Reeves turned to Nolan. That flash drive better contain what you promised. It does. And more. It'll reopen several cold cases connected to the Donovan family's operations. Reeves studied him carefully. You set them up with those properties, didn't you? Made them think they had an escape route. The transfer documents are completely legitimate, Nolan replied. What Melissa didn't know is that I transferred ownership of those properties to a trust for victims of the Donovan family's crimes 2 days ago. She was going to try to sell properties she no longer owned. Later that day, Nolan returned to his house for the first time in weeks. Beverly brought Lila home, and father and daughter stood in the foyer, looking around at the space that had once been their family home. Mom's really not coming back, is she? Lila asked quietly. No, sweetheart, she's not. Nolan put his arm around her shoulders. But you and I are going to be okay. I promise. As they walked through the house, Nolan mentally cataloged all the changes he would make. New furniture, new paint, new memories to replace the contaminated ones. His phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Transfers complete. Justice fund established. Ready for phase 2 when you are. Nolan smiled slightly. The Donovans had thought they were playing a long game. They hadn't realized who they were playing against. What's next, Dad? Lila asked, watching his expression. Nolan pocketed his phone. Next, we rebuild. And then we finish what my father started. Chapter 7, Reclamation. 6 months passed since Melissa and Peter's arrests. The case had become one of the most publicized criminal proceedings in Chicago's recent history, with media outlets dubbing it the Barrett betrayal. Prosecutors had added charges as the investigation uncovered more evidence connecting the Donovans to a multi-state criminal enterprise. Nolan had sold their family home, unable to live comfortably in a space filled with 14 years of deception. He and Lila moved into a renovated loft in the West Loop, a symbolic fresh start in a place without memories or ghosts. On a warm July morning, Nolan sat in the courtroom gallery watching as Melissa entered in handcuffs, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer clothes she'd once worn. She'd lost weight during her pretrial detention, her once perfect appearance now stripped of artifice. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Hers still held defiance, though the confident gleam had dimmed considerably. Today was the final day of testimony before the jury would begin deliberations. The prosecution had built an airtight case, bolstered by the evidence from Audrey Whitlock's flash drive and additional material Nolan had provided from his father's records. Audrey herself had died 3 months earlier, but not before providing a video deposition that detailed decades of Donovan family operations, including their role in Lawrence Barrett's death. As the proceedings began, District Attorney Vanessa Mitchell approached the witness stand, where Nolan was about to give his final testimony. "Mr. Barrett," she began after he was sworn in, "you've testified previously about discovering your wife's affair and the subsequent revelations about her true identity and intentions. Today, I'd like to focus on what you found regarding your father's case." Nolan nodded. "My father, Lawrence Barrett, was investigating Richard Donovan's financial crimes in 2003. According to evidence recovered from Audrey Whitlock, Richard Donovan authorized my father's murder when the investigation threatened to expose their entire operation. And how does this connect to the conspiracy against you? Richard Donovan used his daughter, my wife, Melissa, to infiltrate my life, initially to determine if I had access to any evidence my father might have hidden." Nolan's voice remained steady despite the pain of recounting these truths. "When my grandfather died and I inherited his construction business and properties, the plan evolved into a long-term financial extraction." "Could you explain what you mean by financial extraction?" "Melissa systematically transferred funds from our joint accounts to private accounts controlled by the Donovan family. When Richard Donovan was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he pressured Melissa to accelerate their plans, bringing in Peter Donovan to help orchestrate my death for insurance money." The testimony continued for another hour, with Nolan methodically detailing the evidence trail he'd uncovered. When the defense attorney, Winston Caldwell, had been replaced by a public defender after Melissa's assets were frozen, attempted to cross-examine him, Nolan's responses remained unshakable. "Mr. Barrett," the defense attorney pressed, "isn't it possible that your interpretation of these events has been colored by the emotional trauma of discovering your wife's infidelity?" "No," Nolan replied firmly. "My conclusions are based on documented evidence, recorded conversations, financial records, and sworn testimony from Audrey Whitlock, who was a principal architect of the Donovan organization. My emotional response to my wife's betrayal is separate from the factual evidence of her crimes." When the day's proceedings concluded, Nolan left the courthouse accompanied by Caleb, who had remained by his side throughout the trial as both security and support. "The jury won't take long," Caleb predicted as they navigated through the press gathered outside. "The case is solid. It's not just about convictions anymore," Nolan replied, sliding into the waiting SUV. "It's about dismantling the entire Donovan network." Over the past months, Nolan had channeled his pain and anger into purpose. The Barrett Justice Foundation, funded initially by the Madison Street properties, had grown into a formidable organization dedicated to identifying and supporting victims of long-term financial fraud. Working with federal authorities, the foundation had already helped expose 3 other Donovan family members embedded with wealthy targets. Back at his office, converted from part of his loft, Nolan found Lila doing homework at her desk in the corner. She looked up as he entered, a small smile replacing her usual serious expression. "How was court?" she asked. "Final testimony today. Jury deliberations start tomorrow." He loosened his tie and sat beside her. "How was school?" "Fine. Miss Carmichael says my essay on trust and betrayal might be published in the school literary magazine." Nolan felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that often accompanied Lila's accomplishments these days. At 14, she was processing trauma that would challenge most adults, channeling it into remarkably insightful writing and art. "That's wonderful," he said genuinely. "Have you decided if you want to attend the sentencing hearing? If they reach a verdict this week, it could be as soon as next month." Lila considered the question carefully. "I think I should be there. Not for her, but for me. For closure." Nolan nodded, respecting her decision, while wishing she didn't have to face such adult realities so young. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Reeves. "Need to talk. New development. Can you meet?" "I have to go out again," Nolan told Lila. "Detective Reeves needs to see me. Beverly's downstairs if you need anything." "I know the drill, Dad," Lila replied with a hint of teenage exasperation that had recently begun to reassert itself, a healthy sign amid the trauma. Nolan met Reeves at a small cafe several blocks from his loft. The detective, now a familiar presence in their lives, looked troubled. "We've identified Richard Donovan's son," Reeves said without preamble, sliding a photograph across the table. "Frederick Donovan, 47, former military intelligence, disappeared off the grid about 10 years ago. Facial recognition picked him up entering the country 3 days ago." Nolan studied the image, a tall man with features reminiscent of Richard Donovan, but harder, more disciplined. "Audrey warned me about him. He's dangerous, Nolan. Much more so than Peter or Melissa. His military record shows extensive training in covert operations before he was dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming. Which means he has skills and connections most criminals don't." Reeves lowered his voice. "We have reason to believe he's planning to disrupt the trial's conclusion, possibly targeting you or even Lila." Cold fear gripped Nolan. "I have security measures in place." "Double them," Reeves advised. "We're monitoring Frederick, but he's trained to evade surveillance. Until the trial concludes and sentencing is complete, consider yourself at maximum risk." After Reeves left, Nolan immediately called Caleb, updating him on the threat. Caleb's response was immediate and comprehensive. Additional security personnel, enhanced monitoring systems for the loft, and a revised protocol for Lila's school transportation. That night, after ensuring Lila was asleep, Nolan opened his father's journal again, seeking guidance from the man who had first confronted the Donovan family. Lawrence Barrett's final entries, written days before his death, seemed eerily prescient. The Donovans aren't like other criminal families. They don't just seek profit, they seek control. When threatened, they don't merely eliminate the threat. They systematically destroy everything the threat holds dear. If my suspicions are correct, I must prepare not just for my own safety, but for Nolan's as well. Nolan traced his father's handwriting, feeling a connection that transcended death. "I finished what you started, Dad," he whispered, "but it seems there's one more battle to fight." Over the next week, as the jury deliberated, Nolan prepared for Frederick Donovan's inevitable move. He adjusted his routine, varied his routes to and from the courthouse, and implemented Caleb's enhanced security protocols. Lila chafed slightly under the restrictions, but understood their necessity. The jury returned with a verdict faster than anyone anticipated, guilty on all counts for both Melissa and Peter. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. As Nolan left the courthouse after the verdict announcement, a text arrived from an unknown number. "You took my sister and cousin. Blood demands blood. This isn't over." He showed the message to Caleb and Reeves, who immediately initiated traces and heightened alert status. "He's making contact," Reeves noted. "That means he's ready to move." "Or wants us to think he is," Caleb countered. "Could be psychological warfare." Nolan considered both possibilities. "Either way, we need to be ready." The first attempt came 3 days later. Nolan was leaving his office downtown when a motorcycle pulled alongside his car at a traffic light. Caleb, driving, noticed the rider's hand moving inside his jacket and accelerated through the red light moments before shots were fired. The police found the abandoned motorcycle 6 blocks away. The rider had vanished. He's testing our reflexes, Caleb assessed afterward, learning our security protocols. The next attempt targeted Lila. A man posing as a substitute teacher attempted to remove her from class for an emergency family meeting. The school's enhanced security protocols, implemented at Nolan's insistence after Melissa's arrest, prevented the abduction. By the time police arrived, the man had disappeared. Lila, shaken but resilient, faced the incident with remarkable composure. "He won't stop, will he?" she asked Nolan that evening. "No," Nolan answered honestly. "Not until we stop him." The night before the sentencing hearing, Nolan received another text. "Tomorrow ends it. One way or another." After consulting with Reeves and Caleb, they devised a plan. The courthouse would be secured, with plainclothes officers supplementing regular security. Nolan and Lila would arrive via a different entrance than publicly announced. And most critically, they would use Frederick's fixation on the sentencing as an opportunity to set a trap of their own. The morning of the sentencing dawned clear and cool. Nolan and Lila prepared in silence, both understanding the gravity of the day ahead. Before leaving, Nolan took his daughter's hands in his. "No matter what happens today, remember that I love you," he said, "and that sometimes justice requires sacrifice." Lila nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. "I know, Dad. I'm ready." The courthouse was a fortress of security when they arrived through the judge's private entrance. Reeves met them in a secured room adjacent to the courtroom. "Frederick was spotted 3 blocks away 20 minutes ago," he reported. "He's coming." Nolan nodded. "Then let's finish this." Inside the courtroom, Melissa and Peter were brought in separately, both looking resigned to their fate. When Melissa spotted Lila sitting beside Nolan, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, perhaps the first genuine maternal feeling she'd shown since her arrest. Judge Abernathy entered, and the proceedings began with the prosecutor's sentencing recommendations: 25 years to life for Melissa, 20 to life for Peter. The defense made token arguments for leniency that even they seemed to know were futile. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Peter declined, but Melissa rose slowly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steadier than her appearance suggested, "I won't insult this court by claiming innocence or asking for mercy I don't deserve. My actions were calculated, harmful, and wrong." She turned slightly toward Nolan and Lila. "To my husband and daughter, I can only say that amid the lies, some things were real. My love for Lila was never false, even if everything else was." She paused, appearing to struggle with her next words. "There's something else the court should know. My brother, Frederick, is dangerous in ways Peter and I never were. He believes in family above all else and will seek retribution for what he sees as betrayal." Her eyes met Nolan's directly. "He's here today. I feel it. And he won't stop until he completes what he considers family justice." Judge Abernathy frowned. "Ms. Donovan, if you have specific information about a threat to this court or the Barrett family, you should share it with authorities immediately." "I've told you what I know, Your Honor. The rest is up to him." As if on cue, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Gunshots echoed, followed by shouting. The courtroom deputies moved to secure the judge and doors, while Caleb positioned himself between Nolan, Lila, and the entrance. The main doors burst open. Frederick Donovan stood in the doorway, weapon raised, his eyes finding Nolan immediately. "Barrett," he shouted, "this ends now." What happened next occurred with such speed that witnesses later gave conflicting accounts. Frederick fired. Nolan shoved Lila down behind a bench. Caleb moved to intercept, taking a bullet in the shoulder. Reeves and 2 deputies returned fire. And Melissa Donovan, in what would be debated as either her final manipulation or her only genuine act, broke from her guard and placed herself in the line of fire between her brother and her daughter. 3 bullets struck her chest. She collapsed as Frederick, hit twice by deputies' fire, fell to his knees. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Medical personnel rushed in. Lila screamed. Nolan crawled to his daughter, shielding her with his body as the final shots were fired. When the gunfire stopped, Frederick Donovan lay dead near the doorway. Peter Donovan was secured in a corner by deputies, and Melissa, bleeding heavily on the courtroom floor, reached a hand toward Lila. "I'm sorry," she whispered as paramedics worked frantically to save her. "For everything." Her eyes shifted to Nolan. "Not everything was a lie. Remember that." Her hand fell. The paramedics continued CPR, but the outcome was already clear in their expressions. In the aftermath, as statements were taken and wounds treated, Nolan sat with Lila in a secured room, his arm around her shoulders as she processed what she'd witnessed. "Did she really try to save me?" Lila asked, her voice small. "Or was it just her final performance?" Nolan considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe both. Maybe in the end, loving you is the one true thing in her life of lies." "Do you think she ever loved you? Really?" The question struck at the heart of the pain Nolan had carried for the past year. "I think she might have in her way, but love without truth isn't really love at all." Chapter 8. Collateral Damage. The media dubbed it the Courtroom Massacre. 3 dead: Frederick Donovan, Melissa, and a court deputy caught in the crossfire. 4 wounded, including Caleb. The images dominated news cycles for weeks, with endless analysis of security failures, Melissa's final act, and the Barrett family tragedy. Nolan retreated from public view with Lila, taking her to his grandfather's lake house in Wisconsin while the furor died down. There, surrounded by nature and silence, they began the difficult process of true healing. "I don't know if I want to attend her funeral," Lila admitted one evening as they sat on the dock watching the sunset. "Is that terrible of me?" "No," Nolan assured her. "Your feelings are valid, whatever they are. Complicated relationships leave complicated grief." "Were you going to go?" Nolan had been wrestling with this question himself. "I think I need to. Not for her, but for my own closure. To truly end this chapter." The funeral was a small, subdued affair. Despite Melissa's crimes, her defense attorney had arranged a simple service. To Nolan's surprise, several people from their former social circle attended, along with a few older individuals he didn't recognize but suspected were distant Donovan relatives keeping a low profile. Peter Donovan, his sentencing postponed due to the courtroom incident, was permitted to attend under heavy guard. He nodded curtly to Nolan but maintained his distance. After the service, as people dispersed, a woman in her 60s approached Nolan. "Mr. Barrett," she said quietly. "I'm Eleanor Whitlock, Audrey's sister." Nolan tensed slightly. "I wasn't aware Audrey had a sister." "Few were. I distanced myself from her activities years ago." Eleanor's eyes were tired but clear. "I wanted to offer my condolences for whatever they're worth. And to give you this." She handed him a small envelope. "Audrey left instructions to deliver this to you after everything was over. Said you'd understand when the time came." With that, she walked away, leaving Nolan holding the envelope. He waited until he was alone in his car to open it. Inside was a memory card and a handwritten note in Audrey's precise handwriting. "Barrett, if you're reading this, the endgame has played out as expected. You've proven yourself your father's son, more formidable than Richard ever anticipated. There's one final piece you should have: locations of all Donovan assets never discovered by authorities. Some are legitimate businesses now, generations removed from their criminal origins. Others remain active components of operations you've yet to uncover. Why give you this? Perhaps atonement. Perhaps recognition that some systems deserve dismantling. Use it wisely." W. The memory card contained exactly what Audrey had promised: a comprehensive map of Donovan family assets spanning 5 decades and 12 states. It was a financial treasure map that could dismantle what remained of their criminal enterprise. Nolan took the information directly to FBI Special Agent Dominic Rhodes, who had taken over the federal aspects of the case after the courthouse shooting. "This is extraordinary," Rhodes said after reviewing the data. "With this, we could potentially seize hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds, disrupt ongoing operations we weren't even aware of." "That's the intention," Nolan confirmed. Rhodes studied him curiously. "Most people in your position would want to put this behind them, not dive deeper into the organization that destroyed their family." "I'm not most people," Nolan's expression was resolute. My father died trying to bring down the Donovans. My wife died as part of their legacy of manipulation and violence. I won't stop until every piece of their operation is dismantled. Over the next several months, Nolan worked closely with federal authorities, expanding the Barrett Justice Foundation's mission to support law enforcement efforts against organized crime. The foundation established a witness protection fund, helping others who came forward against criminal organizations. Lila, still processing her mother's death and final actions, threw herself into school and therapy. Her essays on trust, betrayal, and forgiveness gained attention beyond the school literary magazine, with one being published in a national collection of writings by children affected by crime. One evening, as Nolan was reviewing foundation documents in his home office, Lila appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the frame, "about what Mom said at the end, that not everything was a lie." Nolan set down his papers. "What about it? I think I believe her. Not about everything, but about loving me." Lila twisted a bracelet on her wrist, one Melissa had given her years earlier. "Because I remember moments when it was just us, when she didn't know you were listening or watching. The way she looked at me then, it felt real." Nolan nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Even the most skilled liars have moments of truth. Does that make it better or worse?" Lila asked. "That she could love me and still be willing to take away my father?" "I don't know," Nolan admitted. "Human emotions are complicated. She compartmentalized, loved you in one part of her mind while planning terrible things in another." Lila considered this. "Kind of like you did with your revenge plan. You loved me, but still focused on destroying her." The observation caught Nolan off guard with its insightfulness. "That's a fair point. Though my intentions were different." "Were they?" Lila challenged. "You wanted justice, but you also wanted revenge. Mom wanted security, but was willing to hurt others to get it. You're both more alike than you'd want to admit." The comparison unsettled Nolan deeply. Had his pursuit of justice crossed into the same territory as Melissa's criminal activities? Had he become so focused on vengeance that he'd employed the same compartmentalization he condemned in her? These questions haunted him as the final Donovan sentencing approached. Peter, the last defendant, had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for information about operations even Audrey's files hadn't revealed. The day before the sentencing, Nolan received a request from Peter to meet privately. Against Caleb's advice, he agreed, with proper security measures in place. They sat across from each other in a small conference room at the detention center, Peter in his prison jumpsuit, Nolan in a suit that cost more than most inmates would see in a decade. "Thank you for coming," Peter began, his once arrogant demeanor subdued by months in detention. "I know you have no reason to do me any favors." "I'm curious what you could possibly have to say to me," Nolan replied evenly. Peter leaned forward slightly. "I wanted you to know that Melissa didn't start out planning to hurt you. The original assignment was just surveillance, maybe some financial redirection. The insurance scheme, that was my idea after Richard's diagnosis. Why tell me this now? Because despite everything, she did care about you, and she adored Lila." Peter's expression turned contemplative. "In another life, without Richard's influence, without our family history, she might have just been your wife, not your destruction." Nolan considered this. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, just to understand." Peter hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Frederick wasn't just coming for you that day. He was coming for all of us, me included." "What are you talking about?" "Frederick believed in the old ways, family loyalty above all. When Melissa and I agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, we betrayed that code. He saw us as traitors, same as you." The revelation shifted Nolan's understanding of the courthouse massacre. "So Melissa really did save Lila? Not just from Frederick's bullets meant for me, but from his plan for all of you?" Peter nodded slowly. "I believe so. Her last act was probably the most honest of her life." As Nolan drove home from the detention center, his mind wrestled with this new perspective. If Peter was telling the truth, still a significant if, then Melissa's final moments represented something genuine amid years of deception. He found Lila waiting for him, her expression suggesting she had news of her own. "Dad, I've decided something," she announced as he hung up his coat. "After the sentencing tomorrow, I want to visit Mom's grave, and I want you to come with me." The request surprised him. "Are you sure?" Lila nodded firmly. "I need to say goodbye properly, to the real parts and the fake parts. All of it." The next day, after Peter received his negotiated 15-year sentence, Nolan and Lila stood before Melissa's simple grave marker. Lila had brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, nothing formal or traditional. "I don't forgive you," Lila said to the stone, her voice steady. "But I acknowledge that you loved me in your way. And I'm choosing to remember the real moments, even knowing there were false ones too." She placed the flowers at the base of the headstone. "I'm going to be okay," she continued. "Dad and I both will. Not because of you, but despite you. And maybe a little bit because of the parts of you that were true." When she finished, she turned to Nolan. "Your turn." Nolan hadn't planned to speak. He'd come for Lila's sake, not his own. But standing there, facing the physical representation of 14 years of lies and the mother of his child, words formed. "You took so much from me," he said quietly. "Time, trust, the future we pretended to build. But you gave me Lila, and for that, only that, I can say thank you." He paused, feeling the weight of unresolved emotion. "I hope your final act was real. I choose to believe it was for Lila's sake. But I will never forgive what you and your family did to my father, to me, to us." As they walked back to the car, Lila slipped her hand into his, something she hadn't done since before the betrayal. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Nolan squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, different than before, but okay. Maybe even stronger." Chapter 9. Phoenix Rising. 1 year after the courthouse shooting, Nolan stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, addressing the 300 guests attending the Barrett Justice Foundation's first annual gala. "When my father was killed 22 years ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "He was fighting to expose a criminal organization that had infiltrated financial systems across the Midwest. When that same organization targeted me and my family, I discovered that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied." The crowd, comprised of law enforcement officials, victims of financial crimes, supporters, and donors, listened intently. In the past year, the Barrett Justice Foundation has assisted in the identification and prosecution of 17 long-term financial fraud schemes, recovered over $60 million in stolen assets, and provided support services to more than 200 victims. But our work is just beginning. At a table near the front, Lila watched her father with evident pride. Now 15, she had blossomed despite the trauma of the previous year, channeling her experiences into advocacy for children affected by parental crimes. Beside her sat Caleb Weston, fully recovered from his wound and now the Foundation's head of security. Detective, now Captain, Reeves was also present, along with FBI Agent Rhodes and Beverly Thomason, who had remained a steadfast support for both Nolan and Lila. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Lawrence Barrett Scholarship for Criminal Justice Studies, Nolan continued, providing full university funding for children of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. Additionally, we're launching a national awareness campaign about long-term financial infiltration schemes, with educational resources for financial institutions and private citizens. After his speech concluded and the formal proceedings transitioned to dinner, Nolan made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing future initiatives with supporters. Agent Rhodes pulled him aside briefly. "The last of the Donovan holdings were seized last week," he reported quietly. "Between Audrey's information and Peter's cooperation, we've dismantled an operation that spanned 5 decades. Your father would be proud." Nolan nodded, feeling a sense of completion that had eluded him for years. "There's still work to do. Other organizations, other victims. Always will be," Rhodes agreed. "But tonight, take the win." Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Nolan found Lila outside on the terrace, gazing at the Chicago skyline. "Quite a night," he said, joining her at the railing. "You were amazing," she replied. "Grandpa Lawrence would have loved it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Lila spoke again. I got a letter yesterday. From Peter Donovan. Nolan tensed slightly. What did he want? To apologize, mainly, and to let me know he's providing information about other families like the Donovans. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He said Mom will be proud of me. How do you feel about that? Lila considered the question carefully. Complicated. I don't know if I believe him about Mom, or if I care what she would think. But I've decided something important. What's that? I'm not letting what happened define me. Not Mom's betrayal. Not your revenge. Not any of it. She turned to face him fully. I'm going to build something of my own, something that helps people, but isn't just about the past. Nolan recognized the determination in her eyes, the same resolve that had carried him through his darkest days. But in Lila, it was tempered with a wisdom he'd only gained through painful experience. I think that's the best revenge of all, he said softly. Living well on your own terms. The Foundation Gala marked a turning point. Having achieved justice for his father and himself, Nolan gradually shifted his focus from vengeance to rebuilding. His construction business, temporarily neglected during the Donovan pursuit, began to thrive again with innovative projects that emphasize community revitalization. The Barrett name, briefly notorious for scandal, became associated with integrity and advocacy. Nolan established ethical business standards that industry peers alternately admired and resented for raising the bar. Personal healing came more slowly. Dating remained difficult. Trust didn't come easily after such profound betrayal. There were brief relationships, a fellow Foundation board member, an architect collaborating on a development project, but Nolan approached each with caution bordering on detachment. Until Alexandra Mercer entered his orbit, a federal prosecutor assigned to cases developed through the Foundation's work. She approached relationships with the same careful scrutiny as Nolan. Widowed young when her police officer husband was killed in the line of duty, she understood loss and betrayal intimately. Their professional collaboration evolved gradually into friendship, then something deeper. Alexandra never pushed for more than Nolan could give, respecting the boundaries his experience had established. On the second anniversary of the courthouse shooting, Nolan visited Melissa's grave alone. He brought no flowers, spoke no words, simply stood in silent acknowledgement of a chapter closed. Later that day, he invited Alexandra to the lake house where he and Lila had begun their healing journey. As they walked along the shoreline, Nolan found himself sharing plans rather than dwelling on the past. I'm thinking of expanding the Foundation's work internationally, he said as they skipped stones across the calm water. There are similar fraud patterns emerging in Eastern Europe and South America. Alexandra nodded thoughtfully. It makes sense. These organizations are increasingly global. Our response should be too. Would you consider consulting on the international legal frameworks? Your experience with cross-border prosecution would be invaluable. She smiled, catching the professional request that masked a more personal one. I'd be happy to, though I suspect this invitation wasn't entirely about Foundation business. Nolan returned her smile, feeling lighter than he had in years. Partially Foundation business. Partially because Lila thinks highly of you. And partially because I do too. High praise from the Barretts, Alexandra replied, her expression warm. I accept all parts of the invitation. That evening, as they sat on the dock watching the sunset, the same dock where he and Lila had begun processing their new reality 2 years earlier, Nolan reflected on the journey from betrayal to recovery. The Donovan conspiracy had taken much from him. His father, years of his life, his ability to trust freely, but had also given him purpose, resilience, and a platform to help others. Most importantly, it had shown him his own capacity for strength in adversity. Penny for your thoughts, Alexandra said, interrupting his reflection. I was thinking about transformation, he replied. How sometimes the worst things